this little light of mine. Oh, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. Oh, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Now some say you got to run and hide, but we say there's no place to hide. Some say let others decide, but we say let the people decide. Now some say that the time's not right. Well, we say that the time's just right. Where there's a dark corner in this land, gonna let my little light shine. This little light of mine, oh, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, oh, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine.
I'm gonna go out and get him.
Hey, welcome to our second panel.
Bless you.
Allergies.
I had that.
Uh-oh.
Okay, we're about to start our second panel. Julie, can I start it? This is a tribute to Acie Byrd, who was a hero in many ways, an atomic veteran in the forefront of the fight for peace, worked with many organizations, and you're going to be hearing from a number of panelists right now, including Anise Jenkins, Vanessa Dixon, Matt Carey, and myself. We're going to be ending at 9:30, and then at 9:30 we're going to be showing excerpts of Acie's memorial service. Is that correct, Julie? We're ending at 9:30?
9:35, and we'll give them 5 minutes to set up for the film. We'll give them 5 minutes to set up for the film. So 9:35.
Okay. So I'm very excited to introduce our first panelist, and that is Anise Jenkins. She is the executive director of Stand Up for Democracy in D.C., and in other words, a fighter for D.C. statehood. She knew Acie very well and spent quite a lot of time in his last months helping to take care of him. Anise is also passionate about all issues regarding human rights. So let's welcome Anise Jenkins.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having this tribute to Acie Byrd. He was a great man, a really great man, and I'm privileged to have known him. I met Acie in 1997 when a group of committed activists joined together to confront the forces that had stripped D.C. residents of their basic citizenship rights. We were stripped of these rights, the few that we have, we were stripped of these rights by a presidentially, congressional approved financial control board. When the Congress decided that D.C. needed a lesson on how to vote for its leadership for mayor, they took all powers from the D.C. government but Parks and Recreation. These 535 representatives who had been democratically elected by their constituents in their states decided to prove to D.C. residents how little power we had over our own lives and slapped us down. There was a quiet but astonished reaction generally, but there was a group of people who got together in the basement of the National Coalition, Rainbow Coalition offices that were at that time located in Georgetown in D.C., and we decided we weren't going to take it anymore. And I heard of this loose group of fearless, patriotic believers in government of the people, for the people, and by the people. I noticed that within this group there was a man with an extraordinary bass voice who was determined that the members of this loose group were going to become members of an organization. And he pushed to form committees, to establish bylaws, and pushed hard to openly discuss strategy, tactics, and goals. That was Acie. He was an organizer. He argued hard when others wanted to fly by the seat of their pants and do what he called seek the glitter and glamour of publicity, which we really didn't get, but he said, don't try it. I later discovered that this determined man was Acie Byrd, Jr. At that time, I came to meetings out of anger because I discovered I was living in a colony which was treated as a congressional plantation, Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. My volunteer job was to create a database. This man listed his organization as the Atomic Veterans. The name was dramatic, but it meant nothing to me. But I would later learn from him that he had started this organization to help represent those soldiers and veterans who had been exposed to nuclear radiation from his service in the Navy in the 1950s in the Marshall Islands, where the U.S. did nuclear testing. I began to understand more fully his fierce determination to get things right, to not waste time, to protect and fight for those human rights and social equalities such as D.C. statehood, nuclear freeze, having a consistent voice for those rights, such as did WPFW FM radio, which he also helped to found. Acie's commitment to these principles was real and unshakable. Have you ever noticed that the commitment becomes overwhelming, rules the life of the committer, rules the life of the committed? They are always tough old birds. On a personal level, Acie desperately wanted to complete an online course that would lead to his doctorate in African American history. Yes, we would get together over a few weeks, and I would start to type his papers, and we would argue about sentence structure. But then some disruption at maybe WPFW or somewhere else would stop the whole process, and Acie would say, I have to stop right now. I can't continue. I have to pay attention to this. His health suffered from the radiation and over time weakened him. He told me once that the Navy had pulled all his teeth out and didn't tell him why. I asked, was it an experiment? And he smiled and said, maybe. But for some reason, despite the ailments, his face was often frozen and food would stick out of the corners of his mouth. He never complained. His fight against the injustice that the powers to be had imposed upon him very early in his life was set, and Acie was strong enough to keep fighting. He was a tough old bird. Have you noticed that those people who have been directly involved in war and its effects are the ones most opposed to it? It was former President Dwight David Eisenhower who reached the rank of informal chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and later first Supreme Commander of NATO forces in Europe, who warned us of the possibility of the military-industrial complex under which we live today. Acie's belief in peace, feminism, and equality never wavered, and he has suffered the assault of war. Acie just worked hard to ensure that no one would have to sacrifice their health and comfort as he had. That was the pattern of his life. DC statehood, the nuclear freeze, dedication to Paul Robeson Society, WPFW all followed the pattern of the life chosen by this great man striving to end the injustices that forged his future. I'm lucky to have known Acie Byrd Jr. He was a tough old bird.
Yay, Anise Jenkins, stand up for democracy in Washington, D.C., D.C. statehood. And I must say, Acie Byrd was very proud of Anise Jenkins. Okay, we want to invite to the microphone another person who Acie was very proud of, and that is Vanessa Dixon. Vanessa, decade-long activist, who has represented public and private sector workers, particularly healthcare workers in Maryland and DC, working for public and private unions. And I must say, Acie was very proud of Vanessa all the time, but particularly when she was one of the champions fighting to keep DC General Hospital open. So welcome, Vanessa.
Good evening. I am Vanessa Dixon Briggs, a person who had the good fortune to walk on one of Acie Byrd's many paths. I appreciate the honor of speaking about Acie, and thank you, Nuclear-Free Takoma Park Committee, for sponsoring this tribute. One thing is certain, Acie Byrd was an extraordinary human being, period. I know Acie from activist work in the Washington, D.C. community, such as trying to save D.C.'s only public hospital, D.C. General. And later, I had the pleasure of working with Acie on the executive board, or what's referred to as the local station board, of Progressive Radio Station for Jazz and Justice, WPFW 89.3 on your FM dial. At the time, I had no idea that Acie was actually a co-founder of the station. But eventually, it became clear that there was so much more to Acie than I was privileged to know at that time. I discovered more almost by accident because Acie did not talk about all that he had done, all that he accomplished and brought to life through his activism, brilliance, and determination. And he accomplished all this notwithstanding some physical injuries that were remnants of damage he suffered from exposure to radiation while in the Navy. I learned things about Acie through chance conversations with other people who knew far more than me the brilliant star that Acie was. Acie was so far ahead of his time. And Acie, with a group of his activist comrades, such as Gregory, knew how to throw a party. And that's important too. Activists gotta have fun to recharge and re-energize for the fights ahead. Acie was a class act. He was a scholar and a gentleman in the truest sense of both of those words. In terms of working with Acie at radio station WPFW, before I knew that he was a co-founder, I simply knew that he was dedicated and determined to keep the station going on the right path. Given the station's social justice mission, it was full of activists. And I'll speak for myself, if for no one else, when I say that activists can be quite challenging people to work with. Acie was always a calming voice in the middle of the storms that developed around differing perspectives on how to accomplish WPFW's mission to advance social justice and the battles that brewed with Pacifica, the parent organization under whose mission WPFW was formed. Acie was a rock. He was a rock and an anchor, and this was often needed, especially during the formative years of the station. There's a saying, from chaos comes beauty. Acie worked very hard to transform chaos into beauty by serving on the Pacifica National Board to honor the overall mission of the parent organization while protecting the independent interests of WPFW. Acie was dedicated to trying to ensure that WPFW had its own building. He recognized that ownership, rather than paying ever-increasing rent, is something that's fundamental to the survival of the station. But Acie could not alone make that decision happen, and so that battle continues. But he was visionary, and he understood the importance of an entity having its own foundation, literally cement in the ground, in order to grow and thrive and not have the chain of debt around its neck in the form of rent. Acie's dogged determination to keep WPFW on the straight and narrow was just one of the many commitments that filled his life. And I'll end by saying, long live the justice seekers of the world. When their fight is over, may they rest in peace. Viva la justice, rest in peace, Acie.
Thank you, Vanessa Dixon. We now have another speaker who was very close to Acie as well. When I first met Matt Carey, he was the head of the DC Office of Veterans Affairs, working closely with Acie. He is now on the board director of the Coalition to Salute America's Heroes, which consists of almost 75% disabled vets, some of them very seriously disabled. And Matt Carey is also the executive director and the founding president of Veterans and Military Families for Progress. So welcome, Matt Carey.
Thank you, Joan. Julie and Joan, thanks for having me on the panel with so many distinguished speakers and friends of Acie Byrd. I'd like to make my presentation both personal and about Acie's veteran advocacy, which some of you may not know everything. Oh, okay, thanks. I'm not a politician, so I'm not, anyway, I met Acie in 2000 with the National Coalition of Homeless Veterans, and we were at a conference dealing with veterans' homelessness even before President Obama addressed the issue in 2008. We then re-met on Veterans for Carey in D.C. We were both co-chairs of that committee. And we started to work on all the coming home issues for veterans and their families, affordable housing, jobs, mental health, physical health, education, military families, women veteran issues, and a whole host of educational relation issues. Then when Carey lost the campaign, we continued on and formed a group in Milwaukee called Veterans and Military Families for Progress. And that was the first 21st century VSO to actually have military families involved on the boards and whatever, rather than being, and spouses in auxiliary positions. Acie, as you know, had a wonderful voice, very distinctive, enunciated better than anybody I've ever met. And he also was a very brilliant man. He did not know that my father had been on the USS Sanctuary that went into Nagasaki and Hiroshima 2 weeks after the atomic bomb was dropped. And he wanted to know more details. Unfortunately, my father would not discuss that. And the only thing he ever said to me, I said, well, can you tell me about the damage and whatever? And he said, well, have you ever seen a fire where the steel in the buildings have melted? And I said, I have seen that. And he said, that's all I'm going to discuss about that. So really no discussion of the human damage ever occurred between my father and myself. But Acie would discuss it with me. And I felt that he was almost like being my father on that issue. We then attended a lot of meetings and rallies. We testified on the Hill on all these coming home issues for veterans. So he was very determined, very diligent in attending these hearings, and brought a lot of knowledge to the table. He also liked to eat. So I did a lot of breakfasts and dinners with Acie Byrd. And I never really cared about the food coming out the side of the mouth because I had plenty of that coming out of my mouth. But he was just a fantastic human being. And when I got the job as director, DC Office of Veterans Affairs for Vince Gray, I told him that I had sat down with Mayor Gray with 5 other VSOs and said, this is what needs to be done for veterans in the city. The mayor agreed to it, signed it, and he fulfilled just about everything we had asked him to do. The only thing he said was, Matt, I don't have a lot of money for this, so you're going to have to do creative financing. So I got together with Acie, and we put together some plans. And I said, you know what we need, Acie? It's nice to have all these housing vouchers for veterans, but when they go in, they have no furniture. And I said, you know, they don't have this stuff in storage because they have very little disposable income. What would you think about me trying to put together a furniture program? He says, fantastic, but you're going to need a storage facility. And I know this thing out in Laurel, Maryland that you can probably get for $1 a year. It's not being used, and it was DC property. So I said, okay. So I went to the mayor directly on that. He said, yeah, you can have that. So we set up a military supply room out there. And I got almost $2 million donated of furniture from Fort McNair and Fort Myers for these homeless vets for D.C. And we had probably given almost 500 to 700 of them furniture that they never had. Now, I got the beds from Tempur-Pedic, brand new beds. And the Acie agreed with me. He said, Matt, you know, now the officers have all their old stuff. So they have TRICARE for health and all this. So don't, you know, any officer that comes into you and asks for a bed, they can afford to get their own. He said, I said, I know, I want this for non-commissioned officers and soldiers E1 through E7. Those are the ones that really need the help. So then we set up a financial literacy program for DC vets, and I got a company to do that and provide their services for free. We also put together a children's program and for spouses and children, and then we got the AFL-CIO to let us use their main hall for that. And I got Helmets to Hard Hat to donate free bicycles and all this stuff. Now, Acie may not have told you, but he was part of the security detail for President John F. Kennedy on the Sequoia, the presidential yacht. And he said, Matt, he said, if I really wanted to be a wealthy man, I would have written a book about that boat. He said, I met so many movie stars, and you know, President Kennedy entertained a lot on that thing. So he was always very proud of his time doing that. And then I was with him his last days when his health started to fail. And I was over at the hospice in Virginia where he was, and Rick Weidman was there from Vietnam Vets for America. And I just remember how Acie would have those veterans programs with WPFW, and he'd have me on there, and he wanted to talk about all the issues, all the coming home issues. What are the physical and mental health issues for these veterans? And he wanted to talk about, he knew I was going to Vietnam. I hadn't been back there in 44 years. I'm a Vietnam vet, United States Army. And so my wife and I toured Ho Chi Minh, Saigon, Da Nang, and we even got up to Hanoi. And I said, Acie, you know, you talked about the radiation issue very, very well. And I said, it's just continuing on with what the Agent Orange issue was and it is for Vietnam veterans. And now what's going to happen with the Iraq, Afghanistan vets with IED devices and the poison that got into their system from those explosions. So this is a never-ending battle that we have to make sure that Congress addresses and puts the money in to help these soldiers. So right up to the end, he wanted to fight these battles, continue this struggle, and one of the finest men I've ever met. Thank you.
Carrie. Julie asked me to kind of make a call to action at the end. I'm going to do that within 5 minutes, and then hopefully we can have 5 minutes for a Q&A or discussion before we move into excerpts of Acie's homegoing service that Ron Pinchback prepared. I'm going to just mention 3 themes that make me think of Acie. First of all, I was a very close friends with him. He's one of the first people I met when I moved here in 1979. He became kind of a member of my family or our families. I've done countless radio shows with him on WPFW around veterans issues, Paul Robeson, and much, much more. So he's still kind of giving me my marching orders of what I need to be talking about on the radio, and I'm thankful for that. He used to call in during my Thanksgiving dinners and talk to some of the people around the table. So we dearly miss him. Three themes. Number 1, study history. Acie Byrd was a historian. We always wanted him to have his own show on WPFW on history. And one of the things that he would remind us today is, guess what? Mother's Day is an anti-war holiday. It's an anti-war holiday. Its origins are in the United States women's suffrage and abolitionist movement. It was first celebrated in 1858, and in 1870, Julia Howe Ward made a Mother's Day proclamation, and I urge each of you, I was going to read some of it, but there's no time.
There is time. We can have the discussion while he's set up if you want.
Okay, I can pull it up later, but I urge you to go back and read that Mother's Day proclamation and outrage against the carnage of war. And that's why Acie Byrd wants us to study history. We know we have the Hallmark cards. Even I forgot this year that the origins of Mother's Day, although I talk about it every year. And of course, this United States of America, founded in racism, founded in capitalism. Of course, they don't want us to know that Mother's Day was founded by somebody who was fighting against slavery, who was an abolitionist, who was a woman suffragist. They don't want us to know that. That's why we have to study history, and that's why we have to continue the study groups that Acie was so much loved in the 1970s that Alan spoke about. The time for study groups is not over. We need study groups now more than ever. And somebody asked about young people. Well, I'm going to get back to that in a minute. But also in terms of studying history, I want to give a special acknowledgement to Sammy Abbott, Mayor Sammy Abbott, who was the founder. There would have been no nuclear-free committee, I believe, it wasn't for the forward thinking of Sammy Abbott, who's laid down in front of a bulldozer to prevent a 5-lane highway from going through Montgomery County, D.C., and Virginia. And I want to recognize Nancy Abbott, Sammy's daughter. What? They're going to take that out of my time, Nancy. We can. Okay. But you can. We say we have more time, so why don't you?
I just want to mention people that worked with Acie and my father, Sam, Dagmar Wilson, who founded Women's Strike for Peace, Julius Hobson, his wife Tina Hobson, who was also active with Women's Strike for Peace. I want to mention Hilda Mason, and I want to mention Josephine Butler.
Thank you, Nancy. So again, many people have not heard of Sammy Abbott, even people who live here. So that's another reason why we have to continue to study history, and we need to continue study groups. Study groups actually started right after the Civil War. There's a wonderful book called Collective Courage, The History of African American Thought and Practice, which talks about study groups right after the Civil War. So Acie would be telling us we need study groups now more than ever, or just as ever. The second concept, in addition to study history, is build solidarity among everybody, and a lot of people have talked about that. Acie was always in favor of bringing together not only African Americans, white Americans from all classes, seniors, younger people, everybody. And we have to keep that now in the forefront of our minds. And the last point I wanted to make is organize, 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 keep on pushing. Acie would be, I mean, he would really be urging us every day. We have to do more. We have to speak up more. We have to make sure that WPFW and all of our organizations are really organizing now to make sure that this world doesn't disappear. And Acie would be telling that all the time. I wanna recognize Ron Pinchback, who was the general manager of WPFW for many years, and I'm going to ask Ron to come up here in a minute. And he worked very closely with Acie Byrd when he was the general manager. I just want to mention about WPFW, when we talk about organizing, the reason that Acie was so committed to the station is because it's a very important organizing vehicle. No matter how much further we have to go, we still reach tens of thousands of people in a minute. So we need to make sure that that station remains. I want to just tell briefly a story about Acie's founding of WPFW. I just talked to someone who worked with Acie. The station was founded 40 years ago in 1977. In 1979, there was an attempt to put in a right-wing manager of the station. So Acie got together, and if that had happened, there would have been no WPFW Jazz and Justice Radio the way we know it today. So Acie got on the board of local station board, along with Jack Odell, who was a close ally of Martin Luther King, and many, many other things about Jack Odell. Publisher of the Freedom Ways magazine, and much more. Jack Odell and Acie Byrd got on that board together with Arturo Griffiths, and they made sure that WPFW remained a station that was committed to progressive politics, to jazz, and to justice. So he was a founding member of this station. He later served on the board again. He served on the National Pacifica board, and he was a constant political commentator on that station for decades. And I was with him in his last moments. He was even talking about WPFW as he was ready to leave us here. So he would want you to really support this station. We're in our spring pledge drive. We need the support. We can't take it for granted that the station will continue. It's in serious times. So keep that station in mind when you think about Acie. I wanted to, do we have 5 minutes for questions and answers?
We'll break for questions and answers and let them set up for the film. Yeah, Kitty.
I mean,
Now, hold on, Kitty.
I wanted to say that I set some petitions. I set some petitions on the table by that door for people to take with and get their neighbors to sign.
And I wanted to ask Ron to say something if we're not going to have time for Q&A. As someone who's worked,
Well, he'll say, yeah.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Ron.
I'm going to be short. I just want to say this. Acie Byrd, as our guests have said, is one of the bricks that founded WPFW. And he is essentially, and there are a few people that are literally the conscience, who are the conscience of that station. Acie Byrd, Ambrose Lane, Damu Smith, Dorothy Healy. These are great people. And it's unfortunate that they're no longer with us, because that kind of talent, that dedication, that commitment, that spiritual, the spiritual nature that they embolden, it's hard to replace. It's very hard to replace, but it must be replaced. And I just want to say this. Personally, I am going to make sure that this August, when we celebrate or acknowledge, I'm not going to say celebrate, acknowledge the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, John Steinbeck has been very, very instrumental in that, and BFW acknowledging that. Well, we're going to make sure that we're going to do that, continue to do that. We're going to do it even better this year. We're going to be much more robust. Why? Because we need to generate interest in this issue, because we are on the brink. And we do need younger people to understand that, you know, Twitter and Facebook and all that other stuff can go away in an instant. You know, I always say, what happened when people say, how come y'all play all that music and stuff like that, and how come y'all don't do more public affairs? Well, you know, we try to balance that out because it's necessary. You know, music is just as important to our culture in supporting the movements as the talk. Okay, and keep this in mind also. And I want and some people say, well, I want nothing but music. Well, what happens when the music stops? When they drop the bombs, the music stops. Okay? When they raid the offices, the music stops. So we have to be vigilant, you know, and cover both things. So this summer, I'm going to personally produce the anniversary that we acknowledge. And also for Labor Day. We're going to, you know, we always do a special on Labor Day. We're going to continue that tradition, and we're going to make it more robust than ever. We're going to involve a lot more people. Some of you right here in this audience are going to be involved, because we want these voices to get out. And that's what WPFW meant to Acie Byrd, and that is the legacy that we will continue.
thank you, Ron.
So they can get ready and move their tables
And
chairs.
while we're doing that, we'll continue the questions and answers.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to say something. John Steinbach, Hiroshima Nagasaki Peace Committee, and you know, Ron has a really good memory, because every year we would welcome, and we continue to welcome, the A-bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki to talk about their personal experiences. And every year, mostly on Ambrose's show for probably 20 years. And then when Ambrose passed, it was Acie that did it. So I'm really happy to hear you say that, Ron, because we're going to have a very special guest this year, and that is a woman from Hiroshima who was a Korean. She was a 12-year-old Korean whose parents were working as slaves in the Mitsubishi shipyard. So she speaks no English and speaks no Japanese, but we're going to work things out, get some volunteers. So we have a very special program. So I will be in touch with you, by the way. Okay, that's great. And the other thing I wanted to say is that Acie was given the Josephine Butler Nuclear-Free Future Award. And that was because of his work, his hard work. He was a hard worker. He was an activist. He was an academic. He was an intellectual. but mostly he was a hard worker. I mean, he was a really good talker too. I mean, you put him on the stage, and he really sounded good. You know, I wish that I sounded like that. But I just wanted to say is that we need to remember the veterans, and there's a lot here in this room. I'm not going to mention any of you, but I know most of you. So that's all I wanted to say. So who else wants to say something?
Let's give a big thanks to the city AV crew for setting things up for us so nice. Next speaker, you have one? Next question or comment? Oh, don't wave it in the air. You want to.
I just wanted to add one thing.
Please do.
And thank you, Don, for reminding me about the veterans, because we're also going to do a very robust Veterans Day program this year that I will once again personally produce if I have to. I will make sure it gets done, okay? Because there are a lot of perspectives about our vets that need to be addressed, and you know, we all know the story. I don't have to say no more.
Thank you for that gracious welcome. Family, friends, and followers of Acie Byrd. Reverend Hagler, let me begin by thanking you for your advocacy and your activism. This is the place from which to bury Acie Byrd. But I rise this morning to celebrate my good friend, Acie Byrd. I come this morning to celebrate the life that Acie lived. I come to celebrate the life example that Acie has left for us all. Acie's life, of course, will forever be anchored in the peace movement. But Acie was such a thoroughgoing progressive that his activism could not be contained. He and I shared a devotion for civil rights and the civil rights movement. And Acie joined my first campaign and helped me get elected to Congress in the first place. Our activism had different origins, but they brought us to the same place. For Acie, it was his searing experience as a young Navy man, exposed by his government in service to his country, to nuclear testing. But Acie took that experience, ran with it, and made it bigger than his own life. No better way to banish nuclear testing than to become a living example as a survivor and a leader of the atomic veterans. And he was on the front lines of the successful movement that led to the comprehensive test ban treaty that put an end to nuclear testing in the world. But by then, Acie had become a movement man for all time and of all seasons. Acie belonged to a branch of progressive thought and action that did not draw lines, but rather crossed over them. international, Acie's brand of progressive activism has wings. It flew everywhere where the cause was progressive and just. For statehood for the DC to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in Copenhagen, Acie was at both places. How better to spread his progressive activism, however, than to become a founder and a leader of our city's most progressive radio station. Off the air, taking care of business as a board member of WPFW, or on the air with commentary that showed he meant business when it came to progressive political action. My friends, where are the Acie Byrd today? I mean those for whom progressive ideas comprise a worldview that makes the connections that may escape others, such as our country's greatest income gap since the 19th century, and those for whom American power means threatening war to solve every regional conflict. To be an Acie Byrd progressive, your personal experience, your personal activism informs your worldview. That's how you get a worldview. And it demands action. Whether you are without a job because of the Great Recession, or without a vote because you live in the District of Columbia and have not done enough yet to make the city the 51st state. Acie was, above all, a prince of a man. His personal traits cannot be neatly passed on. Perhaps Acie's best and most lasting legacy, however, is the selfless universality of his brand of progressive action. Let us therefore here this morning, in Acie's memory, resolve to try our personal best to remember Acie Byrd by becoming Acie Byrd progressives. Thank you very much.
Congresswoman, thank you for calling for the next generation of Acie Byrds to come forward. And I'm coming forward reading a proclamation from the mayor from the Office of Veterans. Please welcome Matt Carey.
Before I read the condolences from the mayor, I've been asked to make a few brief comments to the Byrd family about Acie's activism with veterans and military families. I met Acie around 2000. I was working as a volunteer for the National Coalition of Homeless Vets. We had a substantive conversation on veterans that had become homeless or at risk since the Vietnam conflict, and again we're facing these issues today. He found out that I had worked for Robert Kennedy in '68, was interested in poverty issues, and he really enjoyed talking to me about that. Acie and I co-chaired the Veterans and Military Families for Senator Kerry in 2004 in the District of Columbia. We pretty much had DC wrapped up for Kerry, so he and I took off for Virginia and started to make the trek down the road to many of the rural areas in Virginia, going to a lot of events. After Senator Kerry did not win, I told him that I was going to carry on, and I was a founding president of Veterans and Military Families for Progress. And when I put the word progress in there, he got very excited. And he decided that I want to be a part of this as well. And he was already part of a political action committee called VetPAC, which is trying to get progressive veterans elected to public office at the federal, state, and local level. So once we got this organization up and running, he said, you know, we really got to get the message out on the airwaves. So he introduced me to a wonderful staff at WPFW's Pacifica Radio. And Acie put together Memorial Day programs and Veteran Day programs so that we could get our message out on the issues affecting veterans who were coming home. And he was extremely knowledgeable of these issues because he himself had been impacted, as the Congresswoman eloquently put, with the atomic vets and the exposure to radiation. So we talked about physical health care, mental health care, jobs, education, military families, women veterans, and each program we put together had some unbelievable speakers and people who could address these issues. And he would then open the mic up for public discussion, and you would not believe the calls that were coming in from all over the country wanting to know about all of these issues. Acie and I then decided to get involved with candidate Obama's election for president. And we said, you know, the difference between the Vietnam War and the current one is there are more families involved as a result of the National Guard and reservists and our volunteer military who got married. And I said, we really need to get that name, military families, out there in addition to the veterans. So we were the DC co-chairs for Obama and Biden Veterans and Military Families for Progress. And you can believe Acie Byrd got that email. And then when the president got elected, he was so delighted because he really felt that he cared about the veterans and their families. So Acie was bigger than life as a human being. He would not be replaced. Love to have someone come along like him with the knowledge, the experience, his sense of service, his activism. These are very difficult things to replace in a human being. And some of his last words is, it's not how long you are on this earth, but it's what you do while you're here. Amen. Amen. This is from Mayor Vincent Gray, condolences to the Byrd family. As Mayor of the District of Columbia, I wish to express my deepest sympathy for the loss of your loved one, Acie L. Byrd, Jr. Mr. Byrd was a long-standing resident of the District of Columbia, resided in Ward 3, and a member of the Plymouth Congressional United Church of Christ. Mr. Byrd was a veteran who served with the United States Navy and was founding members and radio commentator for WPFW FM Pacifica Radio. He was an advocate for veterans and always involved with programs to help enhance their quality of life. As you gather to reflect on the memory you shared with Mr. Byrd, may you find strength in the love of family and warm embrace of friends. He was and truly will be missed by those who knew and loved him. On behalf of the residents of the District of Columbia, our prayers are with you during this difficult time. Signed, Vincent C. Gray, Mayor of the District of Columbia. Thank you.
And we know Acie would have wanted us to discuss the Acie was affiliated and helped to birth and nurture so many organizations. It is very difficult to really represent them all. So we're going to have a series of what we hope will be very speedy comments by people representing a number of organizations. So to keep it going, we would like to make sure that the next person is up here so we don't have to wait. And we're asking you to please honor the directive to try to keep your comments as difficult as it may be, in 2 minutes, because it's very, very hard to talk about Acie in a short period of time. As Sister Byrd said, Acie didn't do anything quickly, and he definitely did not conversate quickly. So we're going to begin with Super Brown. We're going to begin with a representative of an organization that Acie helped to found, and that's Stand Up for Democracy in D.C. Coalition. Anise Jenkins, please come on up. And Rick Powell, please individually help someone else.
Acie was a tough old bird. He took no prisoners and suffered very few fools. An atomic veteran, skipper of John F. Kennedy's PT-109, founding member of Stand Up for Democracy in D.C., he was one that you wanted on your side. I first met Acie in 1997 at what happened to be the first meeting of Stand Up for Democracy in D.C. In fact, our organization was named at that meeting. The Congress had just by undemocratic coup taken over all but parks and recreation from our democratically elected D.C. government. As a soldier for equal rights, he didn't hesitate to take on the fight for self-determination. D.C. statehood. A fierce Democrat, he had been a long-time close friend of Josephine Butler, a founder of D.C. statehood party. He played a major role in the successful 1980 vote for the D.C. Statehood Initiative, which still waits to be fulfilled. A strong and sometimes intimidating voice for equality and peace, a true soldier, Souljah. We can deny the legacy, who can deny the legacy of this veteran of many causes? A few years ago, I told Acie that our mission statement written in 1997 read, "Full democracy." Without hesitation, Acie said in his booming voice, "That must be sabotage. Who wrote that? Full democracy? What does that mean?" Our mission in 1997 then and will always be full statehood and nothing less. And Stand Up, otherwise known as 3DC, has kept steady on that path. Acie was a tough old bird. He gave so much. He cared so much. He was a true mentor, soldier, until the very end. You always wanted him on your side. Thank you, Acie Byrd.
To Acie's family, Reverend Hackworth, thank you for allowing us to use the sanctuary, and to all friends of Acie Byrd. My name is Rick Powell, and I'm here on behalf of Jocelyn N. Williams, who's the president of the Metropolitan Washington Council, AFL-CIO, and our 120 affiliated unions that represent 150,000 working men and women in the metropolitan Washington area. Josh wanted to be here today, however, he is presenting as I speak at the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists Convention in Atlanta, and he asked me if I would come in to say a few words. Personally, I've known Acie since 1976, when he was a graduate up at Howard. And we were involved in the June 16 coalition. If many of you may remember, 1976, June 16, is when there was an uprising in Soweto, South Africa. And many of the students who were protesting being forced to study out the camps were shot down. And that is where many of you probably saw the picture of Hector Peterson being carried by his father, who had been shot by the police. Acie was involved with us in that coalition. We challenged Arthur Ashe, who was on his way to South Africa not to go. He went anyway, but then he made a commitment that when he did go, he would tell them he would not return until apartheid had been abolished, and that the black people of South Africa had been freed. That started an entire nationwide movement going to celebrities, asking them not to go and give credibility to that government. That's something that Acie was involved in, and half of the things I read on this sheet, I read the sheet, but that's only about half of the things that Acie was involved in that have a positive impact. And let me just end with this. A lot of times when we pass, we tend to raise people up to almost superhuman levels in paying tribute. Acie was a man of conscience. He was a man of conscience. And it did not matter what the issue was. Whether it was supporting working people, whether it was supporting trade unionism, whether it was supporting the oppressed people of this planet, whether it was supporting the freedom of women right here in this country, Acie was there. I was listening to a commercial on TV that talked about life as a poem, and each of us is allowed to contribute a verse. Well, every now and then, every so often, someone comes along that contributes a song. Thank you, Acie, for all that you have done for us. And we all will see you soon. Thank you.
So beautiful. I hope that we'll all be dreaming about our dear brother Acie. Continuing with tributes and reflections, calling out Cooper Brown and Michelle Rick Tripling Clements to talk about some of Acie's solidarity work around international causes.
Good morning. Between 1946 and the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963 that brought an end to atmospheric nuclear weapons testing, 250,000 U.S. military personnel stood on the front lines of the Cold War, personal witness to over 200 atomic and nuclear weapons tests that took place in the Pacific and at the Nevada test site. Acie was one of those men. At the young age of 19, Acie was stationed by the Navy in the Marshall Islands, where between May and July of that year, over 2.5 megatons of nuclear weapons were detonated. To give you an idea of how much we're talking about, that's approximately 70 times the total tonnage, the total nuclear tonnage of the 2 bombs that were dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Acie's job was to enter the radiation-contaminated waters after these tests and retrieve the contaminated ships, which the Navy then hauled back to the mainland. 30 years later, Acie joined the National Association of Atomic Veterans, joining with other atomic veterans in a fight for VA health care and compensation for those who were injured or died as a result of their exposure to radiation during the nuclear weapons test. I am not an atomic veteran, but at the time I was working for the atomic veterans. And I had met Acie. Carolyn mentioned the passage of Darrell Rogers' comments. Darrell Rogers had headed up something called the Third World Working Group on Peace and Nuclear Disarmament. My wife, Naomi, was involved with that. She came home one night and said, I think there's a guy you need to meet, a guy named Acie Byrd. who says that he was out at some of these nuclear weapons tests. I'm in Acie, and we immediately bonded, and I think now, from hearing what Laura said about the slow-talking sons of North Carolina, meeting the slow-talking son of North Carolina, this slow-talking Iowa farm boy felt very comfortable. And even though I tell you, in this town I've had to ratchet up my speech patterns at times, with Acie, I can go back to my roots. Anyway, Acie concluded very quickly. I think he intuitively understood that the atomic veterans' quest for justice was inextricably tied to the continuing U.S. nuclear weapons testing that was taking place underground. And the military's perpetuation of this myth that radiation from these nuclear weapons tests would not injure anybody who was around them, designed to injure the enemy, but would not hurt us. As a consequence, Acie was also of the opinion that the atomic veterans could be a strong force for bringing about a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty. So he grabbed a group of like-minded veterans and a few of the rest of us, my wife, myself, Alan over here, and others, and took us off to Copenhagen in 1986 for an international peace conference, which was organized in conjunction with the global nuclear freeze movement. Inspired by Copenhagen and Acie, the veterans returned to the United States and formed the International Alliance of Atomic Veterans, but it wasn't now just U.S. veterans. Somehow, and I have a hunch Acie was involved in this, this was truly an international group. We had Canadian atomic veterans, British atomic veterans, Australian atomic veterans who were part of this organization. And what they did then was, with Acie at the helm, they campaigned for a comprehensive nuclear weapons test ban treaty. Okay. Not resting in early 1994, and I'll conclude this, in response to the Clinton administration's revelation that during the Cold War, the U.S. government funded human radiation experiments, Acie helped again forming something called the Task Force on Radiation and Human Rights, and served as one of the organization's principal spokespersons. This is a coalition of approximately 30 atomic veterans, radiation survivors, Native American and public interest groups. And the task force, and Acie in particular, served as a public voice on behalf of thousands of Cold War-era radiation victims, experiment victims, and their families who were unable to speak for themselves. In closing, I just want to say that, I've known Acie as an atomic veteran, as a peace and disarmament activist, and as a foot soldier for justice. Yet, I came to know him, and I think we all did, came to know and love him for more than that. We knew him because he was also a good friend, but he was more than that. He was family, and he was a brother. I will miss Acie. We will all miss him.
Organization that he was completely committed to. Jim Brown from the Pacifica Radio National Board and WPFW Local Station Board is going to read a proclamation at this time.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored and really proud to be here in this wonderful building to speak about my friend, Acie Byrd. I'm not going to read the proclamation. It's online. You can look at that. But anyway, it's very, very fitting that people said that we have this place to honor our friend Acie. I work on the Nova Station Board with Acie, as well as on the Pacific National Board. The fights that we had there, most of them was led by Acie. There was a group of folks there who were not really that proud that we were there, which we here. But the most important thing that Acie was honored for, that I honored for, was that the people who were fighting us did not know that Acie was a political scientist. That's right. Whenever they wanted to make a move in a hard direction, Acie was there to stop. He was there to fight for us. He won so many battles for WTFW. A lot of what we are today in terms of the station and how we stand and the status we have for the Pacific organization is due to the work of Acie Byrd. And I want to say that his spirit will be with us forever.
Speaking on behalf of an organization that actually we with a number of other people probably in the room co-founded, I welcome my sister Carl Llewellyn speaking on behalf of the South African Southern Support Project. The Southern African Support Project.
To the family, we give our condolences. Acie was more than a comrade, he was a friend. I met Acie with the June 16th Coalition when I first moved to Washington, D.C. with Donald Smith, Sylvia Hill. He's always been there. One of the things that I can say is he was a fierce supporter of the liberation movements of Southern Africa. He was a reader of all of their documents. He followed their struggles. There was never a demonstration that Acie was a part of. There was never a program that we didn't look up and there was Acie. And he brought his military support. He was always a part of our security team, and we always felt secure. There he was, standing at the door, being sure that we were all safe. The one thing I would say about Acie was his ability to follow the leadership of women. He used to joke with us all the time about SAS and the women who led it. And he was always there for us. Never did anything that suggested chauvinism on his part. And we loved him. And we will always remember he was always there for us. Thank you for sharing Acie.
We're going to turn into a whole meeting in here. It's been wonderful, all of the beautiful remembrances, all of the tributes. And we will continue singing the praise song to Acie Byrd. Because there's just so much to say. He shared so much, he gave so much. We are really privileged to be able to have a music interlude right now from someone who is a representative of a royal family of activism. A sister who always comes when she is called and brings her voice to uplift us in her ministry of song and civic activism, representing her dad as well, so well. Please welcome our beloved sister, Acie Byrd.
What an honor it is to share this musical offering for such a beautiful and powerful spirit. If you are able, I ask that you stand as I share both the Tanzanian and South African anthems. The first verse is in Kiswahili, the second is in Zulu and Xhosa. The words translated in English to mean God bless Africa. Hear our prayer. We the children. Come Spirit, come Holy Spirit, bless us, we the children of Africa. Mungu ibariki Afrika, ili ipate kuendelea. Maombi yetu yasikilizwe. Uje utubariki.
participating and being here for this service of celebration to give God the glory and the thanks for the living and life of Brother Acie Byrd. I want to thank Congresswoman Holmes Norton for being here and for being just so committed to us in general. We just thank you for your continued work. Sandy Radley, who I've promoted to my assistant minister. Everybody that helped to put together the service. I mean, we knew that there was a monumental problem. The monumental problem was that there were so many people that wanted to have something to say. And we wanted to make as much space as possible so that our brother Acie could be honored in the way he deserves to be honored. I also welcome you to Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ. And if you don't know much about Plymouth United Church of Christ, Plymouth has been around since 1881. And our original building was at 17th and P Streets Northwest. There's not a sign of a church ever having existed there today. Right? Which also raises up those kinds of justice issues that we need to continue to speak about. I want to just give thanks to Myron, who came and told me what to preach about. And even told me what scripture I was going to use. And so real chip off the whole block, I can say. And so the text is from John chapter 14. It says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many mansions, and if it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. Sisters and brothers, you know, we all stand upon somebody's shoulder. Somebody paid a price somewhere along the way in order to make a way for us. Yes. And so we are really examples of a past and also examples of a future. In other words, we stand in this place, not to just make and hold a place, but to open a way so that there's some space that somebody else can come through. Now, if you notice, even in this text that is before us, Jesus says, I go to prepare a place for you. Just think of what's implied in that text, is that every ounce of our existence is an existence to pave the way for somebody else, to make a way. That's why that scripture that points out that I prepared a place for you. Now, we all got to ask ourselves, what place have we prepared for others in our existence in this world? You know, many of us can talk a good game, but I don't see us doing much sometimes. I see us standing up and giving a whole lot of speeches and lifting up a whole lot of concepts, and yet I don't see folks making a way for somebody else to come through. And making a way for somebody else, it doesn't mean making a way just for those that I know. It doesn't mean making a way for those who are living right now. It means making a way for all of those who are coming behind us, and to try to teach them as they come along that their role now is to make a way for somebody else. You know, I'm lifting that up because that's the life and living of Brother Acie Byrd, who saw that he was making a way through this creation, but not only making a way through this creation, but opening up space so that the voiceless could be heard, and those who were oppressed might go free, and those who desired liberation might see and taste liberation, and therefore use that newfound place of existence to make a way for somebody else. Yes, you see, Martin King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And the idea of it being long means that it is a continual struggle. Any of us who've lived and fought in our lifetimes, we know that there's victories, but there's also momentary defeats. But momentary defeats are not permanent defeats. Right? It only sets you up for a breakthrough. It only sets you up to begin to come at it again and in a different way. And you find out that we open doors in the world for ourselves and for others. Now, Acie was engaged with everything. Let me repeat that. Everything that dealt with justice. Yes. He dealt in his spirit, in his heart. It was not just something that he learned, even though he was a very studied person. But it was something that he had internalized in his spirit, that he was able to see the injustice that was going on in the world around him and the oppression that existed in his world, and therefore he used his spirit as a tool of God's glory. Of God's glory. Now, I know that many of us in the activist community, we don't deal with God too well. Just say amen. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Right? You